What's up guys? Finally we got some UFC fights this Saturday, and it's gonna be about 3 hours before the usual time. So whatever time zone you're in, just bring it back 3 hours and that's when the cards are going to start. There is no early prelim, and it has a total of 12 fights headlined by the rematch of Magomed Ankalaev versus Johnny Walker. We got some other good fights on the card as well. The co-main event between two top 10 ranked flyweights, Matheus Nicolau versus Manel Kape. Jim Miller's on the card versus Gabriel Benitez. That's going to be an interesting one. Phil Haas versus Bruno Ferreira. Arlovski's on the card. He should probably be hanging it up. Farid Basharat's on the card, and a load of guys that you might not have heard of. Like, there's a lot of fighters on here that don't have much experience in the UFC. But these are the kind of cards to get familiar with certain fighters. I have to ultimately say that the prospect of the night is easily Farid Basharat. This guy's good at everything and is definitely going to be at least a top 10 bantamweight. There really isn't a fighter of the night outside of the main eventers. Magomed Ankalaev and Johnny Walker are definitely the biggest names on this card. The stake of the night, the fighter that is in hot waters and desperately needs a win, is, in my opinion, Andre Arlovski. Andre is on a 2-fight loss streak, and if he loses again, this time to Waldo Cortez Acosta, that should be it for him. He should retire then. The banger of the night, the most explosive fun fight on the card, I would probably have to say Phil Haas versus Bruno Ferreira. The only thing about that is Phil Haas doesn't have a great chin to keep it going, but maybe Ricky Simone and Mario Batista can be a big banger as well, right? That's not a bad one, or the main event. And then the fight of the night, in my opinion, is the co-main event, Matheus Nicolau versus Manel Kape. Two very technical strikers and approach it in a very different kind of style. Now let's go through the rest of the card before we get to the featured fights. First fight on the card is between Joshua Van versus Felipe Buenas. I don't know if I pronounced that right. He has a ton of names that different promotions use. I think they're all like a different combination of his full name. I've seen Felipe da Silva. I've seen Miguel da Silva. As you can already expect, Joshua Van, huge favorite going into it. A lot of people think he's going to absolutely bulldoze Felipe. Joshua Van is for sure going to be a future contender of this flyweight division. He is very, very good. His boxing's excellent. He has good leg kicks, a good solid stance with constant threats and feints. He has excellent body work, good power in his hands as well for a flyweight. One of the more promising boxers of the flyweight division for sure. And Felipe's pretty tall for flyweights, 5'7". He has a 71-inch reach, which is huge for this weight class, and he uses it to pretty good extent. It's just some of his fundamentals aren't necessarily the greatest. That's where Joshua Van is going to have a major advantage going into this. He has a much better understanding of the fundamentals overall. Both fighters are usually orthodox, but Felipe will definitely switch to southpaw. He likes to open up that body and head kick as he opens up the stance with the switch. But when we saw Joshua Van fight Kevin Boryas, he defended plenty of lead left high kicks and even spinning attacks coming that same direction. So we saw some good defense so far from Joshua Van there. The problem he had against Boryas was mainly the 1-2, and that's something that Felipe could potentially work on, but from the orthodox stance, he loves to lunge in there with the left hook and doesn't have great head movement most of the time, and I think he can get countered from there. So I'm ultimately going to go with Joshua Van here. I think Joshua Van should be able to kick out that leg routinely, put together some good body shots, and ultimately win this fight through a decision. That's what I'm going with here. Then we go to Tom Nolan, the 6'3" lightweight from Australia, versus Nicolas Mata. Tom Nolan is a big favorite going into this. He's 6-0. He's 23 years old. He has a 76-inch reach, standing at 6'3", and has knocked out most of his opponents. He's a southpaw with some good traditional kicks. He has a good spinning back kick to the body. He got a good knockout in the Contender Series with a close range left hook as the opponent tried to exit. It's hard to exit away from someone like this, not only because of his range, but he seems pretty precise with what he throws out there. And he has a good ability to follow up his kicks with his own punches. And the thing about Nicolas Mata is he's an orthodox fighter with a very rudimentary approach, I think, compared to someone like Tom Nolan. He reminds me a lot of those older Shuto box kind of fighters, where he walks you down a little bit flat-footed, not completely. He will move around sometimes, but he will mostly be right in front of you, giving out some hand feints here and there, but not too much of it, and tries to counter you with these big looping punches. A lot of times he was throwing that left hook when he was fighting Trey Ogden, and he loves that right straight into the left hook blitz to try to intercept the opponent, but he usually likes to throw it when the opponent's backed up somewhat to the cage. That's something that could work against Tom Nolan, some kind of lunging punch like that, but I'm ultimately gonna go with Nolan in this one. I think his kicks are gonna cause massive damage. Mata doesn't really have a great chin. 4 out of his 5 losses have been by knockout. He got destroyed by Jim Miller for his UFC debut, and then 2 fights ago he got KO'd badly by an elbow, so I can see Tom Nolan probably working there as well, but far range is definitely going to be the pinpoint spot of landing these kicks and pumping out the jabs and stuff, trying to open them up for a left hook or an elbow. Then we go to the 6'1", 34-year-old Weston Wilson versus the 5'7", 27-year-old John Silva. Good golly, this is gonna be a walloping. So Silva's going into this as an 8-1 favorite. You thought the last 2 were big favorites, man? This guy's the biggest favorite on the whole card by far. For good reason, in my opinion. Weston Wilson, nothing against the guy, but he's just not UFC caliber. He's pretty decent on the ground, he has good chokes, he uses his length pretty well, but he doesn't have a great ability to get it down there. And his striking is, let's just say, it's not where it should be at all. We saw that when he fought Joe Anderson Brito. Joe Anderson could have done anything he wanted in the stand-up and knocked this guy out. John Silva's mechanics are pretty strange. He seems a bit too compact sometimes, but the guy packs immense power. He has good high kicks, punches you in awkward angles and able to put you down. He has a great guillotine. I'm definitely going John Silva for a first or second round knockout. Then we go to the 5'8", 26-year-old Farid Bashard versus the 5'6", 31-year-old Taylor Lapilus. It's yet again another massive favorite with Farid Bashard, man. He's like over a 3-1 favorite in this for good reason as well. Farid Bashard is an excellent prospect. He's undefeated. He's good in almost every area of the game. Solid stance, good footwork, good fundamental boxing, good kicks overall. He has fast takedowns and quick on them for a counter. His top positioning can be pretty hard to handle sometimes. His transitions are ahead. He's probably going to beat Taylor in pretty much every department. I think the guys he's fought already, and Damon Blackshear and Clayton Rodriguez, are a level above Taylor Lapilus. Lapilus has a pretty good 1-2. He has an excellent counter jab, especially moving away, but I can invite Farid to shoot on him against the fence, get him to the ground and submit him. There's way too many weapons from Farid. So I'm going to go with Farid Bashard, and I'm going to go by a decision win or a 3rd round submission. We go to another massive favorite on the card. We have the 5'8", 33-year-old Marcus McGee versus the 5'7", 31-year-old Gaston Bolaños. And McGee is about a 3-1 favorite as well going into this. The guy has so much power in his hands, man. And also very important, good understanding of foot placement. He knows exactly where he needs to be in order to line up his own punches and cut the cage off very well. Like when he fought JP Buys sometimes would switch stances into southpaw. And as soon as he did that, McGee immediately started cutting off on the outside foot. Immediately. And then when Bai switched back into orthodox, understanding that he's getting pushed back because he's in southpaw, McGee was able to time his steps and wait for the jab to come through, and he countered him with the 1-2 that wobbled him. He has good lead step feints. He also do the thing like Sean Strickland with the high knee shift feints. He brings his knee up and switches into the opposite stance toward the opponent, and this was getting all different kind of reactions out of Bais. And soon enough in that fight, McGee was able to time the right straight of Bais and countered him beautifully with a short right hook, knocking him out. I love the way this guy boxes because his punches don't come from too wide of an angle sometimes. I love those short hooks he's able to put on you, and the 1-2 is very precise. Good footwork. It can seem a little bit janky, but it's very effective. And as for Bolaños, who's, has to be Ilia Topuria's brother or something. These guys look so alike. He has a much more honest striking style. Like, it's not as layered with footworks and feints the way McGee would fight out there with. Bolaños will sometimes keep a tight guard. He will move mostly just to reposition himself. And a lot of his movements are static, but quick. It's almost like a robot moving very quickly, and the timing can be pretty difficult to get down, especially with the way that he throws the right straight after repositioning himself, because when he moves forward at you, it's very, very quick, and he will switch stances right in front of you to line up a left straight instead. He'll fake you out with his hands to line up the body kicks and stuff. He does a lot of good stuff out there, which is a big reason why I don't think McGee should be that big of a favorite going into this. But even as weird as Bolaños fights, I think McGee should be able to get the timing of him and line up maybe a right straight or a left hook on him. So I'm going to go with Marcus McGee, and I'm going to go by a decision win. Then we go to Matheus Semmelsberger, who's coming off 2 losses in a row. He's 1-3 in his last 4 fights. He's going up against Preston Parsons, who's 5'11", 28 years old at the welterweight division. He's coming off a loss to Trevin Giles. It was a pretty close fight. 1-2 in his last 3 fights before they got knocked out by Daniel Rodriguez. And as for Semmelsberger, his last fight he got knocked out by Earls Medic. He lost to Jeremiah Wells in a very close fight. He beat Jake Matthews, but then before that lost to Alex Morono. So I'm pretty sure in this fight, Matheus Semmelsberger is going to try to keep the fight standing, and Preston is going to try to get this fight to the ground, but he could land some big, powerful punches. He's not the the cleanest puncher, he's not the cleanest boxer. He's much better on the ground. He has great transitions, a good ability to get the back. His rear naked choke is his main way of finishing off fights. For an example, when he hurt Trevin Giles with the right hand and barraged him up against the fence as Trevin Giles was falling to the ground, from there you're able to see how fast Preston can recognize a rear naked choke attempt. So that's going to be pretty dangerous for Matthew, and these guys strike very differently. Matthew's a lot more static with his striking. He doesn't move as much as Preston does. He's kind of just like watching to line up his punches, some feints here and there. Preston is moving a lot. Like, he's taking different angles, moving laterally, big head movements, dipping all over the place, which can be a double-edged sword for himself. He could find a takedown off of those dips, or Matthew could start timing those and intercepting with some of his strikes. So ultimately, my prediction for this fight, it's very close in my opinion, but I'm gonna go with Preston Parsons. I think he has more weapons he could work with here. He has good power in his hands. He is pretty ferocious when he gets you hurt, and he has a lethal ground game. So I'm gonna go with Preston, and I'm gonna go by a second round submission. Then we go to Andrei Arlovski versus Waldo Cortez Acosta. We're back with the big favorites. Waldo is a 6-1 favor over Arlovski, and probably for good reason. He's 32 years old. Arlovski's 44. This guy's fought the who's who of the heavyweight division for such a long time, and now is on a 2-loss streak. And I think this probably is going to be a third. Even the 2 last wins that he has against Jake Collier and Jared Vendera, they were not great performances at all. So I'm definitely going with Waldo in this one, winning this one by knockout. Phil Haas versus Bruno Ferreira. So this is very close on the odds, and Phil Haas desperately needs a win here. He is 1-3 in his last 4 fights, and he's not even a bad fighter. It's just the guys he lost to are pretty good, man. Ikram Aliskerov, Roman Dolidze are like top 7 caliber, and the other one was Chris Curtis, who's a good boxer, found the perfect shot on him, and people have to remember that Phil Haas beat Nasruddin Imavov in a very, very close fight. Phil Haas definitely has a lot of good skills, right? He's developed his striking a lot. He didn't get to show it too much outside of fighting Darren Wynn, which is not the hardest guy to look good against on the feet, and Bruno Ferreira is coming off 1 loss to Nursultan Ruziboyev, who's an absolute giant of the middleweight division. He's not going to fight a lot of guys who stand at 6'5" like that. You know, Phil Haas is not nearly that tall, so he had to tackle that fight a little bit differently than his usual opponents. So this time he doesn't have to sit so far out to look for his opening, and maybe he doesn't need to switch stances so often. But then again, Phil Haas is a pretty good wrestler, so maybe switching stance in this fight could throw off the lead leg and then he can counter him. But he definitely needs to mask up his shots more. The reason why he got knocked out by Ruziboyev was because he threw out that naked leg kick and got one-shotted. Now, a big reason why I might go with Bruno Ferreira is for the fact that Phil Haas doesn't have much of a chin, and Bruno just needs to land one time. I think Phil Haas could look pretty clean against Bruno, and he can mix up with his wrestling pretty well in my opinion. He just has to avoid those lunging punches and hooks. So it's pretty hard for me to predict this. I think Phil Haas is overall the more technical fighter. I think he has more areas he can go to, but one shot from Bruno and this could be over. I mean, this is the same guy that knocked out RoboCop Obama. He knocked out Gregory Rodriguez. If he can knock Gregory Rodriguez out like that, he will definitely knock out Phil Haas if he touches him. So I'm gonna go with Bruno Ferreira. Even though I want to go with Phil Haas, I just think he's gonna get caught eventually and get put out. If Phil Haas can avoid that one big shot, he should win the fight. Then we go to Ricky Simón versus Mario Batista. So Ricky Simón is the favorite going into it. He lost his last fight to Song Yadong. Mario Batista is in a 5-fight win streak. He beat Damon Blackshear, Guido Canetti, Benito Lopez, Brian Kelleher, and Jay Perrin. So it's definitely a big step up in competition in my opinion, going up against Ricky Simón. Ricky Simón reminds me of that kind of compact, can kind of do it all style. He's not the best kicker, but he can line up his right hand pretty well. He has good power. He has good submissions overall, especially the strong man submissions like arm triangles and stuff. The guy's very physically strong, very physically powerful, can wrestle, can grapple, can box. And I think he had really good experience fighting Song Yadong for almost 5 rounds straight. That's really going to help him, I think, in this fight with Mario Batista. I think we're going to see a much better Ricky Simón than we saw last time. Batista is going to have the height advantage, he's going to have the reach advantage. He should do very well in the clinch, just like he did against Blackshear. I think his feinting game might get to Ricky Simón a bit to get him winging out that left hook or the right overhand. And I can see Mario Batista countering him with a high kick, with a knee, with a 1-2, and Batista will switch stances on you to give different looks. And he has good scrambles to get back up to his feet. The only thing that worries me about Batista is that sometimes he will keep his hands low, and that's where Ricky Simón could potentially crack him with a big, powerful right overhand. But I'm ultimately going to go with Mario Batista in this fight. Then we go to Jim Miller versus Gabriel Benitez. Jim Miller's coming off a win against Jesse Butler, knocked him out in like 20 seconds. Before that, he lost to Alexander Hernandez, and before that, he was on a 3-fight win streak against Donald Cerrone, Nicholas Mata, who's fighting on the prelims, and Eric Gonzalez. For Gabriel Benitez, Benitez is coming off a first round TKO win over Charlie Ontiveros, and before that got knocked out twice in a row by David Onama, which was really bad, and Billy Quarantillo. He is 2-4 in his last 6 fights, and currently a very slight underdog against Jim Miller. Jim Miller's still doing the thing, and it doesn't make sense at his age with the experience that he has, that he's still finding a lot of success. Gabriel Benitez should get the better of him in the stand-up, but Jim Miller might get the better of him on the ground, right? Benitez has those leg kicks that can destroy Jim Miller, but can also cause a takedown from Jim Miller to happen. Jim Miller definitely has a lot of power. For some reason, in his older age, he became a lot more powerful. He's knocking out so many of these guys. Eric Gonzalez, Nicholas Mata, and Jesse Butler. I mean, he really displayed what kind of power he can actually deliver with. But Benitez has the kicks, and he has some good counter punches if the opponent gets in close enough. But I do think Jim Miller's going to try to take this fight to the ground. Benitez's chin might be cracked, so there is potentially a big shot that Jim Miller can connect with here, but I ultimately think he's going to take the fight to the ground and submit Gabriel Benitez. Or he hurts him on the feet and then chokes him out on the ground. So I'm gonna go Jim Miller by a submission win. So as you can see, a ton of interesting fights, a load of big favorites that should be one-sided, but there are some other ones in here that could be pretty competitive. So there's a lot of locks on this card, man. A lot of big favorites you could capitalize by going to mybookie.ag, where they give you the best lines out there. Magomed Ankalaev 5-1 favorite. Waldo Cortez Acosta -600 favorite. Farid Basharat -300. Marcus McGee -260. John Silva -1300 now. Tom Nolan -330. Joshua Van -250. And I would say pretty much all of these are locks, where I'm expecting all these guys to absolutely win their fights. The only iffy one could be that main event because Johnny Walker is just that crazy. There is a potential big upset with Manel, Kape, and Matheus Nicolau. I think that fight's a lot closer than -280 and +220. That's actually pretty insane how far apart they are in the lines now, even though Nicolau has an official win over Kape, regardless of how close it was. But the best way that I like to bet, the way you're able to use your analysis here, is to live bet during the fights. When the fights are going live, you could bet while the fight is going on instead of before it, to first understand how the fight is playing out, and then you can bet on it. Or you can go with methods instead of the actual victor himself. For an example, Magomed Ankalaev is most likely going to win this fight by a knockout probably, so instead of picking him just outright, maybe picking him just to win by knockout is a lot better. And this can go for a lot of other fighters on the card. There's a lot of ways you can go and bet on these fights. Just make sure to capitalize on MyBookie sign-up bonus, where they'll give 50% of your first deposit off, all the way up to $1,000. So for an example, if you first deposit $1,000, they'll give you $500 on top of that to play with. Or if you put in like $10, they'll give you $5 on top of that to play with. In order to activate this bonus, use the promo code WEASEL, that's WEASLE, to take advantage of MyBookie sign-up offer. Remember to visit mybookie.ag today, where you can win big. And with that, let's go right to our featured fights. Matheus Nicolau versus Manel Kape. Now, these two fought before, but it was a pretty long time ago, almost 3 years ago, and Matheus Nicolau won a very close decision. What you saw in the fight was Manel Kape mostly staying in the southpaw stance. He's a fighter that switches between orthodox and southpaw depending on who his opponent is. And against Matheus Nicolau, the big reason as to why he wanted to stay southpaw against the orthodox fighter is to take away Nicolau's best weapon, and that's the jab. And Manel Kape is usually very square to the opponent, but against Matheus Nicolau the first time, he stayed more sideways. The reason for that is he doesn't want to be a open target for the jab, even if he is in southpaw, right? If he was square even in southpaw, the jab still has a big target to hit. But because he's sideways and his lead hand is in front of his entire body, he can occupy Nicolau's lead hand constantly and take it away from him. So Nicolau instead went to a lot of inside calf kicks, a couple right straights from distance, and even went a wrestling route because he couldn't use the full extent of his jab, but still able to mix up with a multifaceted style. And that's where Manel Kape made his mistake. He was focused too much on what Matheus Nicolau does well and tried to negate those instead of focusing on his own offense. That's why he lost the first round like he did, and in the second round came out completely differently and went after Nicolau and had a lot more success doing it. And I think he's not going to make that same mistake in the rematch of coming out there focusing on what Nicolau's going to do. Manel Kape is going to want to up his output, be a lot more active, and don't allow Nicolau to take control of the pace of the fight. And Manel Kape, especially in the first round, had a very difficult time in finding his way to get in on Nicolau, because again, Nicolau's going to do his best work from long range, and Manel Kape is most likely going to do his best work in close range. Sometimes when he wanted to engage, Nicolau would change levels and shoot on him, and even Manel Kape threw the flying knee and got caught in a takedown for it. Now, Nicolau made a mistake in the first fight by going for a guillotine when he could have just held top position, right? The second time he took him down, he didn't go to the guillotine, he didn't go for the submission, and he was able to hold down Kape. In the beginning of their second round, as soon as Kape was able to find that punch in that close range that he wants, he did a very good job of keeping himself there. And I think he's going to do a much better job at that in the rematch, which is a big reason as to why I think Kape is so favored in this fight, and mostly did that kind of work when he was in the orthodox stance. He was able to time the right uppercut counters, good jabs, good left hooks, and really showed to be the better boxer of the two in a lot of those exchanges. And that is ultimately why I'm going to go with Manel Kape in this fight. I think he's gotten so much better in the areas that he needs to beat Matheus Nicolau. He's got to watch out for the takedowns. He has to really be wary of the kicks. They're not only going to be low, some of them will definitely come up high, and I'm expecting that from Nicolau in this fight to try to be a little bit more dangerous and present more threats on Manel Kape to keep him away than he did in the first fight. Ultimately, Nicolau needs to beat him from range. Manel Kape does excellent work in close, and I think that's where Nicolau will be more vulnerable. He has very good kicks with all different kind of angles and very good leg kicks that can work against Kape. Even Felipe Dos Santos was able to land some good leg kicks on Kape, but we saw sometimes in that fight, Kape will give him a squat feint. He will lower his level a little bit, make it look like he's going to be heavy on his feet to bait out the leg kick, and Kape is able to rebound, act like a coiled spring, and hop away from it. Or he could just simply bring that lead leg back and potentially counter him on that overextension. He likes to line up that big right hand of his. He has an explosive jab, and Kape doesn't do too well against a long jab like that, right? Felipe Dos Santos is able to catch him with some good jabs. It's because Kape keeps his stance pretty square in front of the opponent, and the speed of a jab can be pretty hard to handle for someone who's standing square like that, and routinely likes to reset at a far range from the opponent. If Manel Kape can cover that space and not allow Nicolau to constantly reset to long range, I think Nicolau could be some trouble because he might be trigger happy for the right hand. And I think at that point, Manel Kape should be able to counter him. He could even catch him with a good knee the way Brandon Royval did. Time the jab with a flying knee, right? Because Brandon Royval didn't need to necessarily jump to land his. Here's the thing, if Manel Kape gets in close on Matheus Nicolau, I think this fight probably is going to go to Manel Kape. He has so much power in the pocket like that. He has a great counter left hook, and the footwork in the pocket is some of the best out there. Great footwork and some good head movement when he's right in front of the opponent. He rolls with punches very well, and I think it'll be a little too much for Matheus Nicolau, but that's not going to be free. He has to find his way in, and I think that could be the most difficult part of this fight for Manel Kape. How does he stop Matheus Nicolau from moving around, and how does he get in close? And not only how does he get in close, but how can he stay in close? I think he needs to bait some stuff out there. I think he needs to fake that right hand of his to draw out Matheus Nicolau's or draw a kick. And if he ever gets in close and pushes him back to the fence, he needs to stay in there. He could not back away. So I'm ultimately going with Manel Kape. It should be a good fight. I'm not ruling out Matheus Nicolau at all. And I think Manel Kape is going to win this by a third round TKO. And then we finally go to the main event, Magomed Ankalaev versus Johnny Walker, the rematch. Just like last time, Magomed Ankalaev is a very big favorite going into it, and he's even a bigger favorite this time, knowing how the fight was playing out the first time they fought each other. And I can't disagree with it. I mean, he was winning the fight. Even though Johnny Walker has some good moments, he has some good leg kicks, some good body kicks, he landed some good jabs here and there, Magomed was definitely getting the better of him, right? And he still has the wrestling he can go to. He still has a good counter punching. Johnny Walker doesn't have a good chin. Magomed is one of the few guys that can match Johnny Walker's speed in the light heavyweight division. But I'm very curious to see how much better Walker has gotten, right? We see a better Walker every time he fights, so I'm expecting an even better Johnny Walker this time, right? He knows some of the mistakes that he made against Ankalaev, and he never really gets this kind of opportunity to fight the same guy twice and adjust to what he did wrong last time, you know? Theoretically, we might be getting a more spontaneous or impulsive Johnny Walker the first time he fights somebody, and I'm really wondering how a much heavier game planning Johnny Walker, who can make necessary adjustments, will look out there in a rematch. That I'm very curious about. But just like last time, I'm going to go with Magomed Ankalaev. The fight was playing out kind of how I expected it, and in a 5-rounder, I think that's also going to help Magomed Ankalaev. He's been 5 rounds before, Johnny Walker has not. I don't know if he can explode for 5 rounds the way he does. I mean, even in the first fight between them two, he exploded out there with a flying knee and it almost caught him. And Ankalaev actually had a pretty hard time of getting him to the ground, so I'm very curious about that. But even still, the way I see Walker winning this fight is by catching Magomed with something crazy. Something just gets thrown out there and Ankalaev goes down. Right, that's the way I could see Walker winning, but there's many more ways that Ankalaev can catch Walker in this one. Any kind of counter punch as Walker explodes forward, the leg kicks from distance, the body kicks from distance. He could potentially condition him for a high kick out there. Even if he pressures Walker up against the fence, Magomed could potentially even just throw some crazy stuff out there himself, like left overhands and hooks, and put Walker down. I don't think he has the chin to take big punches like that from Ankalaev. So at the end of the day, I'm going to go with Magomed Ankalaev, and I'm going to go by a second round TKO. So I hope you guys enjoyed the predictions, and if you did, make sure to give this video a like, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and I'll see you guys in the next video.